What games did you play when you were young?
We played football. I played football with Fethard. I played football with Killusty. I also played hurling with Coalmine when I was young, before I went away to the UK. You know.
What did you do when the weather was bad and in winter?
Yeah.
And there was no telly?
In our school days, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. If there was a bad day and we couldn't go to the playground, we used to be doing what we call the cobbler's dance in the hallway coming into the school that had tile floors. You know, it's where you sit on your glove. I'm not used to do now. You know, this is how you don't sit on this. You know, that was our game in the school in those days.
What did you do at night in the winter to amuse yourself?
In our young days, yeah, we did our homework, and when we came home from school every evening, we had a bit to eat. Actually, dry potatoes. You know, we were very poor when we were young. There was a big family, it was 16 altogether, and we used to have to go to the well. We had no water in the house or anything like that, no pipe water in the house. Two of us had to go to the well with a bucket on a stick between the two of us and bring a bucket of water. And then we had to go and pick some sticks, Bresnia sticks, for the next morning to light the fire. And if we had time, then we got an old stocking from Mum. She had an old stocking and we filled it with papers, and we had a football match. That was our football in our young days while we were all going to school. School started at 9 o'clock, and we would have our breakfast about 9 o'clock in the morning, which and in them days might be yellow meal still about 9 o'clock in the morning. Then we had no butter. Very rarely had butter in those days. I'm talking about very, very poor days, 1928, 29, 1930. I first went to school in 1928, 3 years of age. And we would have a bit of dry bread for our lunch. No milk, no nothing. There was nothing like there is today. You know, there's meals in schools today and there's all sorts of things. We didn't have that at all. And then when we go home from school, then we'd have a cup of tea and a bit of bread, maybe, or some potatoes again. And we'd have our supper at 6. Now, nothing like the supper you would have nowadays. You know, you can have what you like nowadays. We couldn't have it in those days.
What type of food did you eat?
It was mostly flour bread. You know, there would be a half sack of flour in the corner, and Mum would make the flour bread in an oven pot over the fire, and we would grow the potatoes. We had a half acre with the cottage. We would grow the potatoes and grow a few vegetables and that type of thing. But the only day we had meat was on Sunday. Yeah. And it was a half pig's head on Sunday. The people who need a pig's head now.
Did your customs connected to food like eating fish on Lent?
Lent was a bit tough in those days. You know, you were only supposed to eat one meal and a collation. But it didn't matter to us because we didn't have the niceties that you have today. So, in effect, we were fasting all our lives, all our young lives. We didn't have nothing. Mostly dry bread. Maybe if a Saturday and Sunday there might be a pound of butter come into the house, you know, and that would be it.
Do you remember anything about the fairs that were held in Fethard?
I do indeed, yes, I do indeed. I left school in 1939 at 14 and a half. And there was no secondary school, national school in Killusty. The only secondary school was here in Fethard, and that was about 3.5 miles from us. We had no bicycles. Our parents couldn't afford to give us bicycles or anything like that, so there was no secondary school. We had to do with national school education. And my first job was with a farmer out in Bannickstown there, Richard Keating. And I was at the first fair here in Fethard, up at 3 o'clock in the morning, up to Richard Keating's, had my breakfast about 3:30, and we drove 10 or 12 cattle, whatever it was, into the fair of Fethard. And the problem was to keep them in the area, whatever area he chose to stand them in there. And then the bidders, the guys who would buy the cattle, would come along and they'd make him an offer, and that's it. And if he sold, he would give you half a crown. I got a half a crown. I worked for 5 shillings a week, 7 days a week, milking 3 cows night and morning, tackling a huge big grey horse. I used to have to stand on the manger. He was too high for me, and the lads there wouldn't give me a hand. I was only a young lad, 14 and a half. So that life was not very easy, I can tell you that. Yeah.
What was look money?
What was?
Look money.
Look money was if somebody bought something, you give them look money back. You know, say somebody bought a heifer from you or something like that. I don't know what they were in those days. For a few pounds of paper, and they usually give a look penny, what they call a look penny, back, that the person would have looked with what he had bought.
How is the street different from now?
There was a huge big square there in Fethard, and there was a pump with a big handle on it down about opposite where the coffee shop is now, someplace in that area there. And there was nothing, no flower bed or nothing in the centre there. The whole place was wide open there. And the shopkeepers, some of them would put up barriers outside their shop windows, you know, to stop the cattle and things from hitting the windows.
And did women go to the fairs?
Did?
Women go to the fair?
Yes they would, and in them days when the women went into the pub, they didn't mix with the men in the pub. They had what they called a snug. It was a barriered off, you know, and they'd be in the snug having their little drop. Nowadays they're all trained to care, everybody drinks together in the one pub. In those days, no, sometimes the wives would come in to see the cattle were sold, you know, and the husband would probably give them a few pounds, a few bob maybe to buy something that they wanted or whatever, you know.
What did you use for transport?
Oh, what we used for transport? Oh yeah, horses and cars, ponies and cars, donkeys and cars. In our young days at home, for a good many years, we had a black donkey, a black ass, and a small car that suited him. And a seat across the thing with a bag of straw on it, and sit on that. That was it. And the people who had a few bob, they went to church and went to town in what they call a pony and trap. You know, like if you had a pony and trap in those days, they called a pony's trap, well, you were somebody with a few bob. That was it. But the ordinary guys had donkeys and cars or a horse and car with iron wheels underneath it.
Can you tell about the type of house that you lived in?
We lived in a council cottage with 3 bedrooms and a half acre of ground. My dad, his mother and father lived over on the foot of Stephen Amon in a place called Tinrush at the far side at the foot of Stephen Amon there. They lived on 12 acres. They were tenant farmers in 1882. They were tenant farmers to the Flahertys at Gillespie Castle. And of course in them days, if you couldn't pay the rates or the tithes, whatever they called it in them days, the landlord handed you what they called a writ, was a piece of paper. My grandfather couldn't read, an awful lot of people couldn't read in them days. But once you accepted the writ, once you accepted, he'd hand you this piece of paper. And on this piece of paper was telling you to get out. That's it. You're evicted. Once you took that piece of paper, you were automatically evicted. So my dad, his family, his father and mother were evicted from that house in 1882. An old thatched shack with mud walls, the shape that is still there on the ground. And that was burned down. That's how the landlord got rid of him, set fire to the thatch and burned it. And the cottage that they came to was being prepared for somebody else who worked in Castle. And they took the lock, they went broke a pane of glass in the back window, my grandfather, of the cottage, went in and took possession. It will tell you how the laws have changed then. Once they were in possession, they could not be put out. So that's where the Sheehans are to this day, from 1882. living in that cottage.
What was the land used for?
It was used to grow potatoes, vegetables and odds and sods, and they used to keep a sow at home. Dad used to keep a sow at home, and she would have maybe 2 litres of bonnets in the year. And he would take them bonnets to Clonmel, and he might get 6 or 7 shillings maybe for the litre. And that meant, you know, that was a lot of money. The 5 shillings a week I earned from Richard Keating for 2 years there, I brought it home every Saturday night and gave it to my mother. And my mother had to, and she gave me back a shilling. Me back 1 shilling out of it. And I had a stack of money on Sundays. You know, people used to be, you know, saying, oh God, he's well off, you know. I used to have 12 pennies, and you change the shilling into 12 pennies, so you had a pocket of money rattle. Yeah. And the day we got our confirmation here, my brother Jimmy and myself, we got 6pence apiece from our father. 6pence each we got from Dad. And the first place we went to was to Bert Newport. And we bought 2 twopenny ice creams. We'd heard so much about ice cream in the school, but we'd never seen any. Didn't know what it was, but it was supposed to be terrific stuff. So we went up to Bert, and we bought 2 twopenny ice creams each, and we had 4pence left. We were rich.
Did much emigration happen when you were growing up?
Did?
Much emigration?
Not when I was growing up, but in the 1950s then things got bad. They were quite bad in the late 20s, the mid-late 20s and the 30s. As a matter of fact, sometime in the early 30s, the sheriff came to evict us. Whatever couple of pence rent was on the house, they weren't able to pay it. So the sheriff and a policeman came one day. I remember it was very, very small, and we were scared of our life. This sheriff had a big white hat on him, and he had a white French coat. And he came in, and whatever kind of a deal he'd done with my dad, anyway, we weren't evicted. But we had 1 chair, and was always inside the kitchen door, and he picked that up and left it out on the side of the road. I suppose a sign of what.
Did you emigrate yourself?
I did. I went away to England in 1953, February 1953. I went to the UK, and I went working down to the Midlands, and I met 2 boys there from Mayo, and they said to me, like, you know, did you ever think of going to college here? I hadn't ever thought of going to college. I'd never been to college in my life. As a matter of fact, the first Sheehan ever to go to University College was there a few years ago, my niece from Killusty. That was the first Sheehan ever to go to college. And I did. I went to college there 3 nights a week for 3 years, to the School of Science and to the School of Building. And I spent 15 years in the UK. And during that 15 years, the firm I worked for, I spent 8 years with that company there. They sent me to Queensland, Australia, to do a job for them there, and I spent over a year in Australia. And when I came back, I didn't go back to the UK anymore. They wanted me to go back, but I'd been away from home long enough, and I didn't want to go back. And I went working for a firm in Dublin, a Dublin firm. I spent almost 20 years with them, and during that 20 years they sent me to Nigeria. So I spent 14 months in Nigeria, doing roads and all that type of thing for them. Yeah. So I was away quite a lot.
Was there any guards around the area?
Yes, there was 4 guards in Fethard in those days and a sergeant. And I remember one time as a child, sergeant, I think we'll name in a minute now, he came out, and the old cell that they had at home, you know, that used to have the bonnets, was on the road. And he cycled out. They had no cars in those days. He cycled out. And he called out my mum, and he said, take that cell in off of the road, or I'll put her in the pound, which meant he would bring her in here and put her, you'd have to pay money to take her out, you know. We had a guard who looked after the children in school, Guard Castles. He lived down there on the Castle Road. He looked after the school children. And I remember my brother Jimmy, one evening we were going home from school down Tansey's Height. He couldn't get a stone to throw at a thrush, so he threw his bag of hooks at a thrush. And it went into the snowdrops, into a snowdrop hedge, and he couldn't find it. So that day, Mrs. Maher was tackling him about his school books being missing, and she was going to complain to the guards. She said, and in walked Castles. We thought Castles was coming to take us all away. We were threatened with a jail in Waterford called Ballybricken. in them days. And you'd be on bread and water and all this thing, you know, this was to make you do what they wanted you to do. So Castles came in and we all row, crying, shouting, oh. And he said, what's the matter? And Mrs. Maher said, well, we were just talking about a boy that threw his bag of books after a little thrush. So he gave us a lecture about throwing stones and that type of thing. Yeah, and there was 4 guys. There was one very nice fella, Garth Burgess. He was very nice. We didn't like Garth Castles. He was a bit, I don't know, he was a bit surly to us. Garth Welsh was the same, but we loved Burgess. Yeah.
Was there many robberies at the time?
Very, 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 very few. As a young lad, there was an alarm going around one time about a foxy robber. Nobody ever saw him. But you know, people used to say things that time without any foundation whatsoever. But everybody around was scared to death of this foxy robber. But there was very, very few robberies. I never heard of any robberies out around our place. And we never had a lock on the door at home. Never. And nobody ever went in or out. So we used to have visitors come at night. Some of the local farmers would come in at night there and they'd be chatting to Dad. But we never had to lock the door. Never. And Dad's tools and all, they were always in the old workshop there and the door wide open. Robberies were few and far between in those days. Now what they were like in towns, we wouldn't know because we had no access to balance. I remember well the coupons of the tea and the sugar and the food during the war. I remember that well. Of course we had coupons to burn because we couldn't afford to buy the things that, you know, the clothes. Most of the coupons were all given away. The clothes coupons were given away to our betters, you know, people who could afford to buy them. You know. Yeah. I remember the brown bread, it used to go green.
Why was that?
During the war. There was no white bread during the war. And Dad sent me in one night with 27 shillings. Sean Kennedy used to go over the border and he would buy flour and stuff black market. And Dad sent me in one night with a bicycle to buy 3 stone of flour at 9 shillings a stone, black market. Yeah. Yeah. I tell you, things were seriously bad, there's no doubt about it. Seriously bad.
Good.
Yeah, times were hard, but you know, the people were much different in them days. They were much more helpful to each other. Nowadays, somebody could be lying on the street, you know, and you would sidestep them, you know, you wouldn't want to become involved.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you needed help, and all the trashings years ago were all done with voluntary labour. You know, if you had a trashing, you were living in an area, you know, and I was going to have a trashing and you and all that, you would send somebody to him, I'd send somebody to him, or go myself or whatever, you know, no payment. And they used to have what they called a quarter cask, a quarter. And they would open that quarter cask over 11 o'clock and go around with a bucket and a cup. The one cup, everybody drink out of the one cup, give everybody a cup of this porter. And the bucket would be half full of chaff by the time, you know, the chaff flying around. Yeah. No, people were much different, you know, much more homely and much more, I don't know.
Friendly.
Yeah.